Good morning. Today we look at Mark 14, verses 1 through 26. And today is known as Pi Day, 314, and the symbol of pi. And it's amazing how many different dates we use like that. Like July 1st is 701 Day, North Dakota Day, and stuff that way. But it's just another day. And I commented after I was getting ready yesterday morning, I was thinking to myself that I had seen a post that was talking about this March, earlier in the month, and how it was this and this, and would have March, have Friday the 13th in it. So as I was putting the headline in yesterday, or the header, I thought, well, today isn't Friday the 13th, and I thought, not that it makes a lot of difference anyway, but it's just one more example of so much of what we see on Facebook, is just something somebody copies and pastes. And it's just, every once in a while you see these things that there's 5 Fridays and 5 Saturdays and 5 Sundays or whatever it may be. And, and some whoopee big deal. And, 4 months out of the year that there are 5 days of like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever it is, in a month, because that's just the way the calendar works. But, it's totally irregardless, I guess. Totally, nonsensical. As we look at this Bible reading today, Jesus is with his disciples, and it says it's 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him, because they knew that if they did it publicly, that they would cause a riot, because the people were so enthralled with Jesus. And it really doesn't tell us what did they really use to get the crowd stirred completely against Jesus, other than just momentum of the crowd on that fateful night. If they planted some people in this group to start cheering against Jesus, and everybody just took it up. But, how could they do that? But that's ahead of us a little bit yet. But the Pharisees, the religious leaders were, they just knew they had to get rid of Jesus, because he was just causing too much conflict for them within the church. He was pointing out the wrongs, and he was trying to correct things, and bringing justice to the common person. And we all know that sometimes, when somebody's working on behalf of somebody else, it's not always well received. But anyway, the Pharisees, the religious leaders were working, trying to figure out a way to get rid of this upstart Jesus. In verse 3, while he was at Bethany, the home of Simon the leper, as he sat at a table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of oil. And sometimes we read that it was Mary, of the Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He was at their house, but Mark doesn't name this woman, just that she is, a woman, bringing a very costly ointment, something that could have been sold for a lot of money. And it says, it could have been sold for 300 denarii. That's almost a year's wages. 300 days worth of wages. That's a lot of money, and given to the poor. Well, I really wonder, would they have sold it and given it to the poor? If it had been sold and, entrusted with the disciples and stuff, it would have gone, to ministry and everything that way. But it's, they were so upset. But Jesus, uses this. He says, this woman has done a beautiful thing. She has anointed me for burial. He's told his disciples 3 times what's going to happen when he gets to Jerusalem. And they've tried to talk him out of going to Jerusalem because of this. And here, he's saying, she has anointed me for burial. And does that, when we read that, it's just kind of, we read it, and it's just like so much of of the Passion story. We read it, and or we gloss over it, and we say, well, I'm not going to read those chapters because they hurt too bad or whatever. But we need to pay attention to what happens in these last few days of Jesus' life. And so he says in verse 8, she has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And then, truly I tell you, what this woman has done will be proclaimed in the whole world, and it will be done in remembrance of her. So here an unnamed woman will live in infamy, and she does. I mean, this woman that I don't remember which gospel that identifies her as Mary, but whether it's this Mary of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, or there were a lot of women named Mary around Jesus, so we know that. But she has done a beautiful thing. Jesus recognizes that and proclaims that about her. And then verse 10, Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him. When they heard it, they were greatly pleased. I mean, this chapter started with the Pharisees were trying to find a way by stealth to arrest Jesus and put him to death. And here comes Judas, one of the 12, handing them Jesus, handing him on a platter, we would say, making it easy. Here he is, I'll do what I can to help you out. And so, they promised to give him money, and he began to look for a day and to betray him. And then we have, on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover is sacrificed, we have the disciples asking Jesus, where should we go that you may have your Passover meal? They were all going to, but, they asked Jesus where to go, and he says, well, go, and there'll be this man, and he'll have an upstairs room prepared. And so in this upper room, we hear this story, and it is in that upper room, that same upper room, we trust that the disciples are gathered, after Jesus' death and at the time of his resurrection, on that first Easter Sunday night when he appears to them, and Thomas isn't with, and then again 7 days later in that same upper room, so this room that this person has prepared, Jesus says, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. And where he enters, go to the owner of the house and say, where is the guest room that I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. So it wasn't something that the guy had to say, well, let me see. It will be furnished and ready. And so was it a banquet room, a place where this person usually entertained crowds of, or large groups of people? But it was there. It wasn't something that somebody haphazardly put together, but it was ready for Jesus. And to me, it's just one more way of showing that God has prepared things. God has prepared Jesus for this day. In all that he's done, and especially in that, I always look at that transfiguration on the mountain as that time of, Jesus being encouraged by Moses and Elijah and the word of God that comes. So God has things prepared and taken care of in all of those ways. And so the verse 16, the disciples went to the city. They found everything as Jesus had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. And, the Passover meal is, it's one of the 3 festivals that the Jews observe every year. And it's just, as we as Christians, it's, Easter is one of the festivals we observe every year, just as Christmas is. And as, the day of Pentecost doesn't seem to be quite such a big thing, but it is, and so this was custom, and Jesus, was following the Jewish customs. And while they were eating, he says, one of you will betray me. They began to be distressed and asked one after another, surely not I. And then this, it is the one of the 12 who is dipping bread into the bowl with me. You know, and, you know, so I mean, it's just, Judas was there with Jesus having this final meal. And it's during this final meal then now that we have the words of institution come, you know, with the take this is my body. Taking a cup, he says, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for money. My blood of the covenant. You know, this is God's promise to us, this covenant, and it's unbreakable on God's part. I mean, God will always be faithful. We try. I mean, we do. I'm sure we do try, but God is faithful. And so Jesus institutes Holy Communion. And we'll participate in Holy Communion on Sunday morning, just 2 days from now. Again, that reminder of all that God has done for us. And then after they had their communion with Jesus, it says they sung a hymn and they went out to the Mount of Olives. And so we're into these chapters 14 and 15 are the story of the arrest and the crucifixion and all of the gory details. So tomorrow we'll finish chapter 14 and then we'll have Sunday morning of worship, and then Monday we'll get back into chapter 15. So God richly bless you, as he always does.